June 2013, question 9. Question is, the UK government currently subsidises the building of social housing. Social housing is provided to low-income households at rents which are lower than the free market rate. Which one of the following would provide an economic justification for these subsidies? Okay, before we go through each one of these answers, I think a key point in the question here is economic justification. It's just important to underline that. I think that's key to understanding what they're getting you to look at here. Option A. The unequal distribution of income and wealth caused by free market results in an unsatisfactory allocation of resources. So does this provide an economic justification for these subsidies? Now, I think anything that includes the term unsatisfactory allocation of resources is definitely an economic justification for some kind of intervention. This essentially is the definition of market failure. Market failure occurs when there is an unsatisfactory allocation of resources. That is an economic justification for any kind of intervention. In this case, it's a subsidy to correct the unequal distribution of income and wealth. So that is actually our correct answer. But let's just go through B, C and D and see why they're incorrect. B is a tricky one. B is the reason that I actually underlined economic justification at the beginning, because B sounds very much like a correct answer, and I wouldn't be surprised if many students picked that. B is subsidising low-cost housing reduces inequalities in the distribution of wealth. Now, if you compare B and A, they sound extremely similar. The only thing really that's missing is A says income and wealth, and B only talks about wealth. But that's actually quite misleading. It's not really got anything to do with that as to why B is wrong. B is actually wrong because it doesn't mention this term, this all-important term here, unsatisfactory allocation of resources. B is really justifying the intervention by appealing to some kind of moral justification for these subsidies. There is an inequality in the distribution of wealth which needs solving. That is normative economics. That is looking at whether it's okay to have these inequalities in the distribution of wealth. And only a moral justification can be apt for those subsidies in that case. Whereas in option A, we had an unsatisfactory allocation of resources, and that's clearly market failure, and that clearly links to economics and the economic justification. So it's just really important, and I know it's very hard with that one, but that you just investigate the terms of the question very closely, and that applies to all questions, but especially this one, because by doing that, by looking for the economic, not moral justification, we can see that B is actually wrong. Let's just go through C and D. C, social housing is a public good because it is both non-rival and non-excludable. Is it non-rival? No. My consumption of social housing would stop you consuming that same social housing. Is it non-excludable? Can people be confined to its use only if they paid for it? Again, it's not a public good, it's not non-rival, and it's not non-excludable. It is in fact excludable. If I've paid for it, I will use it. That will stop you using for it, and it also stops people using it who haven't paid for it. So C is wrong. D, there is market failure in the housing market because of the existence of missing markets. Missing markets is a tricky one. Some people find this difficult to relate to. Sometimes talked about when we talk about negative externalities and there being a missing market for their externality is sometimes used to refer to the fact that the market is simply not providing a good. Now, can we say that in the housing market there is no market for housing? Well, certainly not. There is a booming housing market in almost all decades. It's very much a marketplace. The problem here is not that there is no market, it's that the market is not working, that there's an unsatisfactory allocation of resources. So again, we can cross D off.